Imagine sitting across from someone in a room. No phones, no distractions, just the two of you, and silence. At first it feels harmless, but after a few moments you feel it, the weight pressing in, the urge to speak, to fill the void. Your heart speeds up, your mind races for words. The silence feels unbearable. Why? Because silence forces us inward, and most people are terrified of what lies inside. From the moment we wake up, the world surrounds us with noise. Notifications, headlines, chatter, music playing in every store. Society conditions us to live in a constant hum. Noise reassures us that we belong, that we're still connected, that we exist. But silence strips that away. In silence, there is no distraction from the psyche. The shadow rises. Forgotten fears surface. The unconscious begins to whisper. That's why silence is feared, because silence reveals. Jung observed that modern people avoid silence because they are estranged from themselves. When the persona, the mask we wear, dominates, silence becomes dangerous. Without words, without performance, the mask slips, and what lies beneath, the shadow, the repressed, the unacknowledged, emerges. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is confrontation. It isn't only you who fears silence. Others do too. When you fall silent in a conversation, people rush to fill the gap. They joke nervously, explain too much, even accuse you of arrogance. Why? Because your silence acts as a mirror. It reflects their own discomfort, their own insecurity, their own unacknowledged thoughts. Silence makes them face themselves, and most people will do anything to avoid that. Because of this, society mislabels silence. If you are silent, they say you are weak. If you are silent in conflict, they assume you are guilty. If you are silent in a crowd, they think you are ignorant. But Jung hinted at the opposite. True silence is not weakness, it is strength, because silence requires sovereignty over the psyche. To remain still in a world that demands reaction is to step out of the collective trance. It is to anchor in the self. Silence is feared because it is the threshold between the conscious and the unconscious. Most people hover on the surface of life, clinging to chatter, avoiding the depths. But silence opens the door. It pulls you beneath. And that's why Jung treated silence not as absence, but as weapon. Not a retreat, but an act of power. Because whoever can hold silence without breaking owns themselves, and no one else can own them. Jung on words versus silence. Words are the currency of the persona. They are the mask we hold up to the world. With words, we explain ourselves, justify ourselves, defend ourselves. Words are how we perform the roles society expects us to play. But Jung warned that words are often disguises. They don't always reveal the truth of the psyche. They conceal it. Think about how often people use words not to express reality, but to avoid it. The man who says, "I'm fine," while his chest burns with despair. The woman who says, "Of course, I don't mind," while resentment coils in her stomach. The truth is never spoken. The persona speaks instead. Jung knew this well. The unconscious rarely communicates in plain sentences. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in silence. Words, by contrast, often belong to the surface self, the actor reciting lines, not the soul behind the curtain. If words are masks, silence is what slips beneath them. Silence is the refusal to perform. It is the rejection of the script. When you fall silent, you stop feeding the persona. You create a gap where something deeper can emerge. Intuition, instinct, the whisper of the self. That's why Jung saw silence not as emptiness, but as potential. In silence, the unconscious begins to speak. In silence, you hear what noise drowns out. The raw truth of your psyche. Silence also protects. Every time you speak, you give others material to project onto. They label you, define you, pull you into their frame. Words can make you a prisoner of someone else's perception, but silence resists capture. When you don't answer, you refuse their story. When you don't react, you break their spell. Silence is sovereignty because it denies others the power to write your identity for you. But here lies the paradox. Silence is terrifying, not just for others, but for yourself. In silence, you cannot hide behind chatter. The unconscious begins to stir. Dreams rise, symbols sharpen, the shadow whispers. For most people, this is unbearable. That's why they flee into noise, into endless words, into distraction. But Jung insisted, if you cannot face silence, you cannot face yourself. Words belong to the persona. Silence belongs to the self. And in a world ruled by noise, where every thought is shouted, every opinion broadcast, every moment filled with chatter, the act of silence becomes revolutionary. To choose silence is to reclaim psychic sovereignty. To sit without reacting, without explaining, without performing. That is the moment you stop being lived by the world and start living from the core of yourself. Silence as shield against projection. Imagine someone hurling accusations at you. They want a reaction: anger, defense, denial. If you respond, you step into their frame. You play the role they've written for you. But if you remain silent, something strange happens. Their words fall into the air with no place to land. The attack collapses under its own weight. Your silence makes them face themselves. This is one of Jung's most unsettling truths. Projection is the unconscious attempt to make you carry what others refuse to see in themselves. When someone projects, they are trying to hand you a piece of their shadow. The liar who suspects everyone else is dishonest. The jealous one who insists you're unfaithful. The insecure colleague who calls you arrogant. Projection is not just misunderstanding. It's an attempt to colonize your psyche with their unresolved darkness. And words are the trap. The moment you defend, justify, or explain, you accept their frame. You let their projection live inside you. Silence breaks the pattern. It denies the projection entry. By refusing to respond, you refuse to carry what isn't yours. This is why silence is so unnerving. It leaves the projector holding their own shadow, forced to confront the very thing they tried to exile. It's not passivity, it's power. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires refusing to identify with projections. Silence is how you hold that boundary. When you do not answer every accusation, when you do not explain every action, when you do not fill every gap with words, you remain sovereign. You are not what others say you are. You are not the roles they assign. You are not the shadow they cast. Silence preserves that truth. But here's the paradox. Your silence doesn't just protect you. It exposes others. When you don't fill the space with words, people see themselves in the mirror of your stillness. Their discomfort is not about you. It's about the parts of themselves they've been trying to ignore. This is why manipulators hate silence, why abusers demand reaction, why society fears the one who refuses to answer. Silence is a mirror they cannot control. If words invite you into the collective script, silence removes you from it. Silence says, "I will not play the role you've written for me." And in that refusal, you take back psychic sovereignty. Silence in the battle with the shadow. Silence is not only what protects you from others, it is what allows you to face yourself. Because when you strip away noise, when you refuse distraction, what rises from the depths of your psyche is not always gentle. It is the shadow. The shadow does not arrive in words. It emerges in the restless silence of the night, in the tension you feel when nothing is happening, in the sudden memories that surface when you're alone. Most people drown this with noise, music, chatter, endless scrolling, anything to escape the silence that makes the shadow visible. But Jung insisted, if you cannot face the silence, you will never face the shadow. And if you never face the shadow, it will rule you from the dark. To confront the shadow is not to fight it. It is to withstand it. Picture yourself sitting in silence as rage, envy, shame, and fear rise inside. The impulse is to run, to explain it away, to numb it. But silence demands you stay, to remain still as the unconscious shows you what you've hidden. This is why silence feels like a battlefield. It's not the outside world you're resisting. It's your own darkness pressing forward, demanding to be acknowledged. Mystics across traditions understood this. Monks retreat into silence, not for peace, but for confrontation. Shamans enter silent trances to meet spirits, which Jung would call archetypes of the unconscious. Silence strips away the outer world until only the inner world remains. Jung believed this confrontation was necessary for individuation. Silence is the furnace where the shadow and the self meet. When you endure silence long enough, something shifts. The shadow no longer feels like a monster waiting to devour you. It begins to reveal its gold, the buried strengths, desires, and truths you had repressed. But that gift only arrives through silence. Only when you stop fleeing, stop talking, stop distracting, does the unconscious open its hand. Noise feeds the mask. Silence awakens the shadow. And though the shadow terrifies, it is only in silence that you can look it in the eye. It is only in silence that the battle becomes integration. Silence as power in relationships. Silence doesn't just shape your inner life, it alters the space between you and others. In relationships, silence is never neutral. It unsettles, it shifts dynamics, it reclaims ground that words often surrender. Manipulators thrive on reaction. They bait you, provoke you, twist your words. If you answer, they gain leverage. But if you stay silent, the game collapses. Jung saw this as a psychic truth. Projection needs participation. The manipulator throws a story at you. If you speak, you step into their script. If you remain silent, you refuse the role. That refusal unnerves them. They push harder, demand a response, accuse you of coldness. But the truth is simpler. Your silence exposes the emptiness of their power. Without your reaction, they have nothing. In intimacy, silence holds a different weight. Many lovers mistake noise for closeness, constant talking, constant reassurance. But silence with another person is the real test. If you can sit together without speaking, without filling the space with distraction, you see what's real. Silence strips away projection. You stop speaking to the idea of the other and begin to feel who they actually are. It can be unsettling, because much of what we call love is the dialogue between two personas, not two souls. Silence interrupts the performance. What remains is truth, sometimes beautiful, sometimes terrifying, always real. In conflict, silence becomes a weapon of sovereignty. Think of an argument where one person falls silent. The other may grow louder, angrier, desperate to pull them back into the fight. But silence refuses escalation. It withholds fuel. This is not the cold silence of withdrawal or punishment. It is the calm silence of strength. The refusal to let noise dictate your state. Silence says, I am not controlled by your storm. I will not let your fire burn through me. Most people are used to filling silence with dominance, reassurance, or apology. When you choose silence instead, you break the script. The other person can't predict you, can't control you, can't project onto you as easily. That unpredictability makes silence dangerous and powerful. In relationships, words often surrender sovereignty. Silence reclaims it. It protects against manipulation. It clarifies love. It disarms conflict. It exposes the truth. And in a world where everyone is desperate to be heard, the one who can remain silent owns the ground others are fighting over. Jung's rules for psychic sovereignty. Jung never wrote a handbook called Rules for Sovereignty, but his writings give us the map. He showed that silence, properly used, is not withdrawal. It is weaponry. It's how you defend the self against the noise of the world, the projections of others, and the chaos of the unconscious. Here are 4 rules that emerge from his thought. Laws of silence that can return your mind to you. Rule 1. Withdraw from the collective noise. Jung observed that most people live not as individuals, but as fragments of the collective. Their opinions are borrowed, their desires copied, their words rehearsed. Silence is the first step out of that trance. By retreating into stillness, even for a few moments each day, you separate from the noise of the crowd. You begin to hear your own thoughts. Sovereignty begins here, when you no longer confuse the collective's voice for your own. Rule 2. Refuse to identify with projections. Silence is a shield. Every time you react to accusations, praise, or ridicule, you give others control over your identity. But if you hold silence, you refuse to be captured by their story. Jung warned, the more you identify with what others project onto you, the more you live as their puppet. Sovereignty means leaving their projections where they belong, in their psyche, not yours. Silence is how you refuse the theft of your soul. Rule 3. Face the unconscious. Without running, silence is not only external, it is internal discipline. When silence makes you restless, when old fears rise in the dark, the instinct is to run. But sovereignty means holding the silence. Jung called this active imagination, sitting still while the unconscious reveals its images. The monsters are never as destructive as the act of fleeing them. Silence allows you to face your shadow without collapse. That confrontation is where true strength is born. Rule 4. Speak only from the self. Silence doesn't mean never speaking. It means refusing to speak from the mask. Jung believed individuation meant allowing the self, the whole psyche, not just the persona, to direct life. That means your words must emerge from integration, not from performance. In practice, speak less, but when you speak, let it be from the self. Words that come from sovereignty carry a weight no noise can match. Together, these rules form a law of silence. Withdraw from noise. Refuse projections. Face your unconscious. Speak from the self. It's not a vow of silence. It's the art of silence. Used rightly, silence becomes more powerful than any speech. It protects, reveals, and transforms. This is what Jung meant by psychic sovereignty, the ability to live as a self, not as an echo of others, not as a mask, not as a puppet of the unconscious. And silence is the weapon that guards it. The cost of silence. Silence is powerful, but it is not safe. To wield it as a weapon is to accept its price, because silence doesn't just protect you, it also isolates you. It unnerves others. It invites misunderstanding, and sometimes it provokes attack. When you withdraw from noise, people call you distant. When you refuse to explain, they call you cold. When you stand firm in silence, they accuse you of arrogance. This is the paradox. Silence is the path to sovereignty, but sovereignty is lonely. To step outside the collective noise is to step outside belonging. Jung warned that individuation is always a solitary process. Silence cuts the strings, but it also cuts the chorus. You must be willing to lose the comfort of approval. Silence unsettles because it refuses participation, and people who cannot control you will often punish you. The manipulator will escalate. The crowd will mock. The accuser will grow louder. Your refusal to speak destabilizes the game, and those invested in it will strike harder. This is why silence takes courage. It is not passive, it is active defiance, and defiance always carries risk. There is also danger inward. Silence can swallow you if you are not grounded. Extended silence can stir the unconscious so powerfully that it overwhelms. Depression, anxiety, despair. Jung understood this well. To sit with silence is to open the door to the shadow. Without guidance, without strength, the shadow can flood the psyche. That's why many traditions pair silence with ritual, discipline, or community to keep the confrontation from becoming annihilation. Silence is not a toy. It is not emptiness. It is a blade, and every blade cuts both ways. If you use silence to avoid truth, it will hollow you out. If you use it to punish others, it will isolate you further. If you use it without preparation, it will drown you in the unconscious. But if you wield it consciously, to hold boundaries, to face yourself, to break the collective trance, then silence becomes more than absence. It becomes sovereignty. The cost of silence is misunderstanding, loneliness, and sometimes pain. But the reward is psychic freedom, and Jung would argue the price of silence is far less than the price of noise, because noise costs you yourself. Noise sells your sovereignty to the crowd. Noise makes you a puppet of the archetypes. Silence may be hard, but noise is slavery. Return to the opening image, the courtroom. A man sits at the center, accused, surrounded by noise. Lawyers argue, the jury whispers, the public demands a confession. Everyone waits for him to speak, but he does not. Minutes pass. The silence grows unbearable. The crowd begins to fidget, their certainty faltering. Some call him guilty, others see dignity. But the truth is this: his silence has broken the room. It has forced every person there to face themselves. This is the hidden power Jung pointed to. Silence is not passivity. It is presence. It doesn't answer the world's noise. It makes the world confront its own. Noise is everywhere. News feeds, endless debates, voices demanding reaction. Each word pulls you further from the self, deeper into the collective trance. But silence is rebellion. Silence is refusal. Silence is the last weapon of psychic sovereignty. It shields you from projection. It anchors you against manipulation. It gives space for the unconscious to rise and for the self to speak. Most people fear silence. They rush to fill it with chatter, distraction, noise. But once you learn to wield it, silence no longer feels empty. It feels sovereign. It is the pause before choice, the gap where you reclaim your freedom, the stillness where you remember who you are. Silence will cost you. It will isolate you. It will make others nervous, even hostile. But the cost of silence is nothing compared to the cost of noise, because noise sells your soul to the world. Silence keeps it yours. And in a time where everyone is shouting, the one who can remain silent is untouchable. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is sovereignty. And in a world possessed by noise, silence is the last true weapon. If this spoke to you, subscribe to Factspire TV. Here, we don't amplify the noise. We uncover the hidden laws of the psyche, so you can live sovereign, not possessed.